think about the labor rate that you charge. It probably came from a podcast, your bookkeeper, or your gut. Honestly, that's how most of us got ours. But here's the thing, there is no universal markup. And if that number's off, it adds up to real money. But honestly, that's not on you because you've probably never been shown how to properly calculate your labor burden. Hey, I'm Brian, and I was a professional custom home builder and large-scale remodeler for over 21 years. And by the end of this video, I'm going to walk you through exactly how you should calculate the labor burden so that you're ensuring you're charging out your labor at the right rate. And then I'll show you the tool that I built that does this all for you. And it starts with the most expensive mistake in the entire process. Most builders think that the wage is the cost. Take a carpenter that you pay $34 an hour. In your head, it's easy to think that that costs you $34 an hour, but it doesn't. The 34 is just the part that lands in their paycheck. Two additional stacks of costs sit on top of that wage. The first one is the statutory stack. It's the amount that the government makes you pay for various things: Social Security, Medicare, federal and state unemployment, and workers' comp. In Canada, it's CPP and EI, but basically the same thing. That stack is a percentage of the wage and it's not optional. The second stack is the one that you hand them yourself: the phone, gas card, uniform, training, and safety gear, to name a few. Now, none of that will show up automatically in their paycheck, but all of it is money out of your pocket for every single hour that you employ them. This is what we call labor burden. It's everything on top of the gross wage that it takes to employ someone. The mistake is that most builders stop at the first stack of costs when calculating their labor burden, and they forget the second stack. And the problem is, you will feel it not on one single job, but definitely by the end of the year when you wonder why the labor contribution to profit wasn't as high as you thought it would be. Now, here's the part that trips a lot of people up, is that the two cost stacks do not get calculated the same way. And the second one is where the real money hides. So why does the second stack cause so much trouble? It's because it plays by completely different rules. The first stack, the government one, is easy because it's a percentage of the wage. Pay the carpenter more and it scales up automatically. But the second stack doesn't. It's not a percentage, it's actually flat dollars. The phone, fuel, a vehicle stipend, and uniforms, which could total easily $4,500 a year. And that's whether the carpenter works 2,000 hours or 200. So to calculate this correctly, you now need to take that $4,500 and spread it across the hours that you can actually put towards a job. But how many hours is that really? To size up a year's pay, you typically take the hourly wage that you pay your employee and multiply it by 2,080 hours. That is the average number of work hours available in North America, 40 hours at 52 weeks per year. But available hours and worked hours are completely different things. So let's build the real number starting with 2,080 hours. We'll start by taking out the statutory holidays. Those are 7 in the US and 9 in Canada. 7 days equals 56 hours, so now we're down to 2,024 hours. Now to take out vacation. Now, vacation time and vacation pay are actually two separate things. The time is the weeks that they're off, and those hours come right out of what's available for them to work. The pay is what you owe them for that time, and that's included in the wage costs. In Canada, it starts at 4% matched to every hour that an employee works and rises to 6% after 5 years of employment. In the US, there is no standard. It's whatever you decide that you'll offer as a company. Now, 4% is basically 2 weeks, so let's run with that example and say that we're going to give 2 weeks off, typically 1 in the summer and 1 over the Christmas holidays. Now, it can also climb to 3 weeks in total if they decide to take an additional week off at some other point in the year. Sticking with the 2 weeks, that's 80 hours, so now we're down to 1,944 hours. Then we'll take out sick days and appointments. Let's call it 5 days, so it's another 40 hours that comes off, so we're down to 1,904 hours. Then take out the hours that you pay for, but you actually get no work out of. The short days and the slow stretches, the make work projects like reorganizing the storage units or getting work done on your own house. So let's call that another 10%, and we're down to 1,714 hours. Now we're going to run that $4,500 across the 1,714 hours, and that comes out to $2.63 an hour. And if you had spread it over the 2,080 hours, it actually drops to $2.16 an hour. Now that gap looks tiny, but it's money you're never going to get back. That means you're undercharging for every hour on every employee for the entire year. Now, for a salaried supervisor or project manager, the metric actually gets worse. And that's because you're paying the full salary no matter how many hours are actually being worked. So here's what happens with a $34 an hour carpenter. That wage becomes a $43.26 cost to you. That's about $9 an hour that you may or may not have been counting on every single hour that they work in an entire year for you. And that equates to around 27% on top of their actual wage. And that is an example of what labor will cost you per hour. So now you know how to calculate your real cost. But cost is not your price. Before you turn that $43.26 cost into a charge rate, you need an actual target for your margin. But here's the trap. Most builders will price from the outside in. They start with what they think a client will accept and then back that into a markup. But that means the real cost was never in your math, and the client is setting the margin and not you. So we need to flip that. Burden cost is the floor. That is your break even. Then the margin has to go on top of it. And then the market sensitivity is the last thing that you check, not the first. So what's the target? You should aim for a 33% gross profit margin on every hour of labor that you sell. Now remember, markup and margin are not the same thing, so a 33% gross profit margin actually is a 50% markup. Now you might be asking, why does it feel so high? In fixed price, the work will take longer, your estimate misses in a few categories, and you suddenly ate a change order that you should have actually charged for. That margin is the buffer that keeps you profitable when all of that happens. In Cost Plus, that 33% offsets the leakage, the unbillable hours, and the courtesy discounts you give clients. But the bigger reason is the math. That labor margin is what can actually lift your gross profit margin on projects in Cost Plus up into the coveted 22 to 26% gross profit range, which is mathematically impossible to reach if you're charging the typical 15 to 20% in the Cost Plus world. So don't think of the 33% margin as padding. It's literally the floor for running a profitable business. Now you've got both of the numbers, the actual burdened wage at $43.26 and the 33% margin. Now the only question left is, how do you actually build your rates? And there are two ways to do it. One of them quietly leaves money on the table. Now the first is a schedule of rates. That just means it's a separate rate for each role: carpenter rate, superintendent rate, and project manager rate. And you build them the exact same way. You take the burden cost that you just calculated and you add your 33% margin right on top. That means your carpenter at $43.26 now becomes a $65 charge rate. Now that means whether you're estimating in fixed cost or cost plus, you're going to use $65 an hour to build your estimates. But there is a catch. It's key that you build your margin on top of the highest paid carpenter here so that you don't ever slip below the 33% margin. That's because you likely have people in the same role that are at different pay rates. So if your $34 an hour guy is your highest paid carpenter, then your charge rate is $65 for carpenters. But if you've got a carpenter at $38, then you want to build the actual charge rate based on that number. Everyone cheaper than him just comes in richer than 33%, and that's totally fine. Now the second way to price, which is gaining a lot of popularity, is where you use one blended labor rate. One number for everybody, no matter the role. It's faster, and plenty of builders are using this, particularly in Cost Plus. But this model can quietly bleed profit if you're not careful. And that's because you're going to make more than the 33% gross margin on the lower paid people in the company and less on the higher paid people. That means your higher paid superintendent can run at a slightly lower margin because your carpenter is making up the difference. But it's critical that you watch two things. First is on the project. You have to make sure that you have balance in the hours. In other words, let's say that the superintendent is full-time, but you don't have a full-time carpenter on the entire project. That means you've earned a lot less on the superintendent for the entire duration of the job, and you haven't quite made up that labor contribution from the lower paid carpenter. And at the company level, you need to watch your labor burden tracker across everybody. In other words, that means that you should see at least a 33% average margin across everybody in the company. Now, get both of those right, and a thinner margin on a super or a project manager doesn't actually hurt you. Get it wrong, and you're quietly bleeding profit. All right, just gone through a bunch of numbers, and probably your head is spinning a little bit, so I built something that will do all of this math for you. It's called the Labor Burden Tracker, and let me show you how it works. You start by picking your country, then the state or province, and I'm going to go ahead and select Washington State. Now, the second that you do that, all of the statutory burdens will load automatically for you. Then I'm going to add myself here and drop in a wage. We'll pretend I'm still a carpenter making $34 an hour. Now we're going to add these company costs in here. We totaled $4,500, so I'm just going to split it between these different categories. And at the top, the burden is actually building as I do this. Now, one of the key parts, let's work on the throughput hours that we discussed. Note that because I'm setting up a US company, the 7 stat holidays or 56 hours has automatically been deducted from the 2,080 hours starting point. So I'll enter the vacation days here, which we said was 2 weeks or 10 days. Then sick days and appointments, which we said was another 5 days or 40 hours. And then we get to this field, the effectiveness percentage. This was related to the slow days or the make work projects, which we said we were going to allow 10%. And just like that, the hours fell from 2,080 hours to the 1,714 hours we calculated earlier. And look what happens to the cost. That $34 an hour cost is now showing its true cost per hour. And I've set the charge out rate here automatically to $65 for carpenters, and so you'll see that I'm just above a 33% margin. So we're all good there. And what I'm going to do is actually zoom out and look at the overall to make sure that my average margin is at least 33%. Now that's the whole thing we just spent this entire video building all on one screen for you. Now for years I tracked all of this in spreadsheets, but I finally got fed up the other day and thought there's got to be a better way. I've got to build a better tool that's going to do this automatically, work like software without the subscription price. So if you want to pick it up, the link's in the description below. It's a one-time purchase and it's yours forever. So that's the promise I made to you at the beginning of this video. That is how you calculate your labor rate. The wage, both stacks of the burden, and the margin that you need. And the best part is that it's built from your numbers and not borrowed from a podcast. And now you'll know exactly what an hour of labor actually costs you for every single employee in your company. And that will ensure that you're charging the right rates in your estimates. The tracker just keeps it all straight and does all the calculations for you. Again, it's linked in the description below if you want to pick it up. If you found today's video helpful, please go ahead and subscribe and make sure to leave a comment as well. It's the best way you can help support our channel and help us grow on YouTube. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. We'll see you next time.